Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Pokémon Film Perspectives. And today we're going to be discussing the 11th animated film to be released as part of the Pokémon franchise, Giratina and the Sky Warrior. And once again, what is my history with this movie? Well, I had seen advertising for it. However, unlike The Rise of Darkrai, I was not able to see this movie when it premiered on Cartoon Network, but I was able to record it when it was on TV. And as such, I was able to watch the recording, and I remembered liking it when I was a kid. And that's really all I can think of when it comes to this movie. I remember that when I was a kid I liked it, but if you ask me for specific details regarding this movie, I think I'd stare at you blankly, because the more time has gone by, the more about this movie I've genuinely forgotten. I remember some things about it. I remember that it's part of a larger continuity between The Rise of Darkrai and the next movie we're going to be talking about, but yeah, this movie kind of, prior to this vlog, if you asked me about this movie, I'd probably draw a blank. Is there a reason for that? Well, let's talk about it and find out. So, yeah, let's get to the plot summary. And as any Pokemon movie is wont to do, this one does have a prologue. In this case, the prologue opens up in a forest somewhere as we actually meet one of our main characters. In this case, it's a small, adorable little Pokemon called Shaman. It basically has a green back, walks on 4 little legs. It's adorable, has these 2 flowers on it. Again, it's just cute. And we see Shaman as it runs to a watering hole because, well, as you do, you get thirsty. However, Shaman actually has some company, as arriving at the watering hole is none other than the embodiment of time itself, Dialga, who is also here just to get a drink. It's kind of funny in that regard. You have to remember that Dialga and Palkia, despite being literal fucking embodiments of time and space, are also technically wild animals, so odds are they need to stop and get a drink every once in a while. However, no sooner does Dialga take a sip from the lake that something strange happens, as what looks like a whirlpool or something appears in the lake, and from the whirlpool comes one of the headliners for this movie, Giratina, which, let me see if I can find Giratina here. Yeah, this is Giratina, if you can see through. There it is. That's Giratina. And upon arriving in the real world, Giratina basically attacks Dialga and ends up dragging it right back into the whirlpool, which in reality is not really a whirlpool. It's actually a portal to a place known as the reverse world. Basically, it's basically just what's on the other side of the mirror. And basically, in the reverse world, Giratina reigns supreme. Now, as the reverse world I'm not going to call it a barren wasteland, because it's not. The reverse world, in many respects, is like one giant funhouse mirror. There are buildings that stretch all over the place, structures that just float aimlessly, gravity shifts all over the place. Honestly, I think it looks pretty damn cool. But the thing is, nobody really lives here except Giratina, as it's literally the only Pokemon here. The reverse world is its home, and well, for whatever reason, it's got a beef with Dialga as it drags into the reverse world and then starts beating its ass. Unfortunately, though, this beatdown has an unwanted passenger, as in the midst of the scuffling, Shaman wound up getting caught in the tussle and wound up getting sucked into the portal alongside Dialga. And as such, as Dialga and Giratina are duking it out, Shaman is just holding on for dear life onto Dialga's back, just doing whatever it can not to be involved in this battle. And on top of that, it turns out the battle has a few bystanders, as it turns out there is actually someone living in the reverse world. This guy in ragged clothing and his shield on, who are watching the battle and are taking marvel at it, with him noticing the Shaman. And then back in the real world, we actually see this movie's villain as we see a guy sitting in what looks like like this super advanced cockpit, wearing a large yellow jumpsuit with a 0 imprinted on it, and complete with anime pretty boy white hair that covers up one of his eyes. And his name is in fact Zero. I don't know if it's an alias or not, because everyone fucking calls him it. For all I know, his mom named him Zero. Why would you name your kid Zero? It sounds like that you were begging your child to get picked on as a kid, so maybe that's why he's an asshole. I don't know. I don't care. Point is, Zero is apparently keeping an eye on Giratina, and thus when Giratina came out of the reverse world to grab Dialga, his machines picked it up, and he's now trying to zero in on the location. Unfortunately, though, because Giratina is back in the reverse world, he can't exactly catch up right away, and in the midst of all this, in the midst of the tussle, Dialga keeps trying to get away from Giratina, but every time Dialga tries going towards the portal, well, Giratina just drags him right back in. However, in the midst of the scuffling, we see Shaman ends up getting knocked off Dialga and ends up landing on one of the floating platforms, and it lands right in the middle of this weird big black pile of smoke. And the instant Shaman's in the middle of it, it begins absorbing the smoke right into its flowers, which go from red to black. And as everything keeps going to hell and Shaman keeps getting caught in the crossfire, the flowers on Shaman's back start glowing, turning red again, before unleashing this large green explosion right there in the reverse world, which actually has larger consequences because from the explosion, another portal opens that sucks Shaman right back to the real world. And of course, Dialga immediately takes the opportunity to try once more make a run for it. Giratina tries dragging him back, and in response, Dialga is able to knock Giratina off of him before shooting a large blast right at Giratina's chest, which not only has the benefit of throwing Giratina back a little, but it seems to do something to Giratina, as after the attack, for a couple seconds, he seems to, glitch for whatever reason. Either way, Dialga manages to get through the portal, and while that portal closes, Giratina has the power to open portals between the real world and the reverse world. So Giratina just is like, well, I'll just open a portal and come after you. But when he opens a portal and tries following after, well, it turns out that whatever Dialga did had much more lasting consequences, because every time Giratina gets close to one of his portals, he begins glitching again and seems to actually go backwards in time. And I don't mean in the sense of he ends up going back, and I don't mean that in the sense of, he goes back in time every time he does this. No, I mean literally every time he gets close to the portal, he freezes and then just seems to glitch right back to whatever position he was in before. And as basically, whatever Dialga did, it basically trapped Giratina in a time lock, so to speak. While time flows normally for him and otherwise, and whenever he tries getting close to one of his portals, the time lock will basically just prevent him from being able to even reach the thing. So, for all intents and purposes, Giratina is now stuck in the reverse world. But it turns out that he does have another way out, as Giratina is through the reverse world. We see that there are these weird orbs or bubbles or whatever that showcase what's going on in the real world. And while we see that Giratina uses this to try and get a little payback on Dialga, as Giratina destroys the one that reflects Dialga, which in turn has an effect on Dialga in the real world. In the meantime, we see that Giratina is now keeping an eye on Shaman, as Shaman, upon entering back in the real world, gets caught up in the rapids of the river connected to the watering hole, as it basically gets thrown downstream right into a nearby town. Which actually brings us back to our main character, to our anime main characters, as we see Ash, Dawn, and Brock as they're in this town, and they're basically just getting ready to sit down and have some dinner. Breakfast? Lunch? I have absolutely no idea. It might be brunch. I don't really know. Point is, Brock's made food. They're at a picnic table. Ash has to wash his hands because they're dirty as hell and he forgot his gloves. And everybody's just getting ready to just stuff their faces because they're all hungry. However, they end up getting an unexpected guest on the scene. As while Ash, Dawn, and Brock let their Pokemon out so they can indulge in the food, we see that Shaman arrives on the scene, having gotten very dirty due to its tumbling all the way into town. And while no one is looking, Shaman begins literally eating. No, not literally. Shaman just eats all their food. Just literally eats all their food. And I mean, they had a stack of pancakes right there on the picnic table. Shaman pretty much eats all of them. That thing is very hungry. As such, Ash and Co. see Shaman and, of course, are angry that this thing ate their food. And when they try to stop Shaman, Shaman starts fighting back, so to speak. Not to the point where it's getting violent, but it does cause some slight physical harm. As at one point, I think either Pikachu or Piplup try to take a pancake away that it's eating, and in response, Shaman just eats right through it and accidentally bites the hand that bites whatever Pokemon was holding it, which in turn which in turn causes a bit of a freak out, which in turn causes Shaman to fly off the picnic table right into the grill that Brock was using, which in turn kicks up smoke, which Shaman absorbs, and causes another explosion, causing what little food was left to go flying all over the place, including the Pokemon's food, which they're a little pissed at Shaman for ruining their dinner as well, but Dawn ends up stepping in to defend Shaman as she picks up Shaman and actually brings it over to a nearby fountain so it can get washed off, and it's nice, it looks cute, and we learn that apparently Shaman has a little trick. It has telepathy, so it can communicate with our main characters. I have absolutely no idea if any other Shaman can do this. When we meet other Shaman later in the movie, none of them seem to have telepathy, so I don't know, is this thing unique to this particular Shaman, or was it a side effect from it going into the reverse world? I genuinely have no fucking idea. Point is, Shaman can communicate with the group, and apparently Shaman's a bit of a spoiled princess, because while Shaman is thankful to Dawn for washing it off, it starts basically criticizing her for how it could have for how she did it. Like, if she could have been a little rougher, the water was a little too cold, and this attitude is consistent throughout the rest of the movie. Shaman's kind of a spoiled little princess, and it gets to the point where if you're not singing Shaman's praises, then Shaman basically will see you as a suitable target. Case in point, when Shaman begins acting critical and starts just talking and just basically acts like it's the best thing in the world, Ash gets justifiably annoyed with this thing. And when everyone asks the Shaman, hey, how did you get here? All Shaman says is, oh, from over there. And like, what's over there? It's like, oh, I just said over there. Like, well, what's over there? You're not giving us any details here. And when they try asking for more specific details, Shaman's still being vague. Although in Shaman's defense, this is possibly because Shaman is suffering from a fever, and as such, when the group realizes this, they rush it to a Pokemon Center. Thankfully, Nurse Joy is able to get it fit as a fiddle, but it's here we get a little bit more exposition on Shaman and what it is. Apparently, that attack that Shaman used at both in the reversed world and at the I guess campsite or dinner site, I don't know, where Ash and Co were, it was an attack known as Seed Flare. Basically, what Seed Flare is that Shaman basically absorbs any toxins or pollutants in the air into its body. And basically what it does is that it purifies whatever it takes in, turns it into clean energy, and then basically releases whatever it took in as a massive explosion. Which sounds pretty damn cool, except the thing is, depending on how much toxins that Shaman takes in, can basically depend on how strong of an explosion it is. When Nurse Joy citing one specific example where Shaman wants to get an entire forest just because of how big Seed Flare its Seed Flare was. So yeah, Ash and Co are a little thankful that they didn't have that all it did was absorb the smoke from their barbecue. But the thing is that Nurse Joy also mentions that it's weird that Shaman's all the way down here. You see, at this time in year, all the Shaman basically go on migration. As all of the Shaman in the area go towards this, local garden, which it's not really like a public garden. It's more just a garden. It's just called a garden because it's an area with lots of flowers. And what the Shaman do is that once they reach this area, they go on a collective migration from there to some other parts of the world. I don't know where, they don't really specify. And basically wherever they go, they're supposed to bring flowers. And the thing is, Shaman confirms that this is true, as it basically says that it wants to get to the flower garden, because thanks to what happened with Dialga and Giratina, it's been thrown way off course and just wants to get back to the flower garden so that it can meet back up with its friends when the migration starts, as if it starts and Shaman isn't there, then they're just going to leave without it. As such, Shaman basically elects Ash and Co. to take it to the flower garden. Why? Because it wants to get to the flower garden, and these guys happen to be nearby. Dawn is more than happy to do it. Ash gets annoyed, especially when Shaman jumps on his head and is basically forcing him to go where it tells him to go. So yeah, Ash and Co. pretty much get shanghaied into helping Shaman. Although things immediately kind of take a turn as when Shaman manages to get the group outside the Pokemon Center, they end up running through, running through a park, and the park has all these reflective art pieces. And as Ash and Co. are walking past them, we see that through the reflections, Giratina is watching as Giratina ends up sensing Shaman, and Shaman can sense Giratina and begins freaking out to the point where it doesn't want to go any further. However, before it can go on and explain why it's like this, well, who should show up but Team Rocket? Yeah, for some reason, Team Rocket were hiding in a closet in the Pokémon Center, don't ask me why, and they overheard the talk about Shaman, and they decided that they wanted to get Shaman because, well, they think if they deliver this thing to the Giovanni, then they'll get some big bucks. As such, they grab Shaman and just make a run for it, with Ash and Co. following after, but as they run past one of these reflective structures, well, another portal to the reverse world opens up, and the portal ends up sucking in Shaman and Team Rocket. And when Ash and Co. arrive at the portal and see what's going on, basically the portal ends up working overtime as it ends up sucking in Ash, Dawn, Piplup, and Pikachu, with Brock unfortunately stuck in the real world, while everyone else gets sucked into the reverse world. Thankfully, Team Rocket end up losing their grip on Shaman as they fall into the reverse world, but in the process, Ash and Dawn manage to find Shaman. Sorry about that, I heard coughing. And basically when they arrive, they're wondering what the hell this place is. Though, unfortunately, they don't really have a lot of time to ask those questions because who should immediately arrive on the scene but Giratina, who's making a beeline for Shaman, who assumes that Giratina is there to eat him, or eat it. I don't know what Shaman's gender is. I'll say it or they, them. I don't really know. It sounds like a girl most of the time, but it has another form where the voice sounds more masculine, so I guess they, them, or it, since it is a Pokemon. I don't know. Anyway, but I'm getting off topic. Basically, like I said, Shaman thinks that Giratina is going to eat it, and so it urges Ash and it basically just begs Ash and Dawn to protect it, and so Ash and Dawn try to do what they can as they get their Pokemon to try and attack Giratina, but their attacks are either avoided or barely do anything. Thankfully, though, they do manage to find an escape as they try and make a run for it, and sure enough, they end up running into that guy from earlier as he manages to track them down, and he gets Ash and Dawn to follow him into one of the warped buildings in the reverse world. And as such, after Ash and Dawn follow him for a little while, they do manage to find themselves in a rather strong structure it's here where they kind of learn more about the rules of the reverse world and about the whole gravity shifts and all that. But either way, this guy introduces himself as one Dr. Newton Graceland, and the thing is, he's apparently a leading scientist on the reverse world, and he's been basically living here for some time, studying this place. He's just pretty much obsessed with it, to the point where he thinks he's a leading expert on everything, if he does say so himself. Everybody can sense his ego in that regard. But the thing is, he's a nice guy, and he's aware that the group probably wound up here on accident, and when he sees Ash and Dawn with Shaman, he realizes that that's probably the Shaman from earlier, and that Dialga is targeting it. Now, he has no idea why Dialga is targeting Shaman, as he just assumes that not Dialga, Giratina. It's Giratina who's targeting Shaman. Was I saying Dialga this whole time? I apologize if I was. But basically, Giratina is targeting Shaman. He recognizes Shaman as the one that was with Giratina and Dialga before, and he doesn't understand why Giratina is targeting Shaman. And they basically just assumes that the reason why it's targeting Shaman is because Giratina is angry that Shaman interrupted the battle with Dialga. But either way, the group is clearly here against their own wills, so he offers them a chance to get out of here, as he does know of a portal that will lead the group back to where they came from. As such, he leads the group through, and we get a bit of exposition about why Giratina is after Dialga. It turns out that Giratina is a little pissed at Dialga because of the events of the last movie. So, a thing with the reverse world is that it's basically, if you can't, like I said, it's the world on the other side of the mirror. But basically, it's more than just, everything's reversed here. It's like a support structure. The reverse world supports the real world and vice versa, which makes sense. The reverse world, after all, what we see in the reverse world is true. The reverse world in some ways does reflect what goes on in the real world, because while the reverse world clearly is devoid of human life, there are buildings there that seem to warp and stretch out, and it's clear that these buildings were not just these buildings didn't just appear out of nowhere. They were clearly built, but most likely they were built as reflections of stuff that was going on in the real world. So as a result, the reverse world just began twisting and changing to reflect what was going on in the real world. But likewise, the reverse world is not just a But likewise, the real world doesn't just influence the reverse world does the exact same. Because, well, when things start getting trippy in the real world, there are errors or just things that don't make sense. The reverse world basically steps in to compensate for these changes, and how these changes manifest is through these poisonous gas clouds that appear every now and then, which is what we saw Shaman absorbing earlier in the movie when it first visited the reverse world. Basically, every time the reverse world has to fix a problem in the real world, these gas clouds pop up. And so as a result, the reverse world just basically does whatever it can to maintain stability in time and space in the real world. Which brings us back to Dialga, and by extension, Palkia. So, it's here we actually do get a bit of an explanation for why Dialga and Palkia were fighting in the last movie. Apparently, both Pokémon believed that the other one was intruding on their territory. They don't really explain why they both thought this, but for whatever reason, both Pokémon thought the other was trying to step on their turf, so to speak, and that in turn is what led to the fighting. Now the thing is, while that movie made everything look like that the entire battle was localized exclusively to Alamos Town, well, it turned out that the reality quakes that we saw in the last movie had much larger, far-reaching implications than we were aware. Because after all, Dialga and Palkia are the Pokémon that represent time and space, two foundational elements of the known universe. So when they were basically coming to blows, it was causing the reverse world to go into overtime to try and compensate, and as a result, the reverse world was actually getting flooded with more of these poisonous clouds. And the thing is, Giratina obviously is aware of the reverse world's purpose, and in some ways it even maintains the reverse world so that it can continue doing this thing. But the thing is, everything has a limit. And when you have two literal embodiments of the very natural forces of the universe deciding to duke it out, with the universe being caught in the middle, naturally you're gonna get a little annoyed when the place that you're living in that's supposed to maintain the order of the universe is suddenly starting to have to go overtime just to keep up with these guys. And if what happened in the last movie is anything to go by, it nearly failed that job too, because if it wasn't for Darkrai, Dialga and Palkia would have destroyed everything that was still in existence just from them having beef. That was it. So naturally, Giratina is a little pissed at the Pokemon of time and space, which is why it attacked Dialga at the beginning of the movie, as it basically has a grudge against these guys and it wants to make them pay for how much shit they put the reverse world through. However, as we saw at the beginning, Dialga managed to escape, and now Giratina is basically trapped in the reverse world without any way out. Now again, Newton still is not aware of why Shaman is being targeted by Giratina, but again, it's clear that it has something to do with whatever Dialga did. Either way, the group eventually Newton does lead the group back to the portal. Sorry. And as such, Ash, Dawn, Shaman, and their Pokemon do manage to get through, with Newton pretty much warning the duo that they need to be aware of reflective surfaces, because Giratina is still going to be targeting Shaman, so they need to be careful. As such, the Pokemon trainers and their Pokemon manage to get back into the real world and meet back up with Brock. Though unfortunately, after they leave, Team Rocket comes running up behind, and unfortunately, they just missed the portal, as once they tried jumping for it, they instead almost jump off a cliff, and as a result, Newton just kind of takes them in as his students. I say students in air quotes because even they realize that them being labeled students is just another word for cheap labor. So what can you do? Regardless, Ash and Co are back in the real world, and they do let Brock in on And Ash and Dawn do let Brock know about what they saw in the reverse world, but Shaman still very much wants to get to the flower garden. However, before the group can make their way to the flower garden or even figure out where the hell it is, they end up getting attacked by a group of Magnemite, and the one leading them? Why, it's Zero, of course! You see, Zero was keeping an eye on everything when Giratina kept trying to breach through back to the real world, and through his spying, he was able to figure out that Giratina has its eyes on Shaman, and I think he's been able to figure out that Shaman has the capability of opening gateways to the reverse world. As such, Zero wants Shaman, and so now he's attacking the group. Thankfully, I think Pikachu manages to disrupt the Magnemite enough for the group to make an escape, and as such, while Zero's Pokemon do chase after the trio, they manage to give Zero the slip as they get onto a nearby train that's passing through town. As such, upon arriving on the train, the group wonders what the hell they're going to do next, but thankfully, help arrives in the form of other passengers. For you see, these passengers are locals, they know about Shaman, and thus they're here, and thus, basically, they have some info to dump, as they not only know where the garden is, but they know all about Shaman and how it's supposed to be the gratitude Pokemon. Yeah, I didn't mention that before, but Nurse Joy claimed that Shaman was the gratitude Pokemon, something that Shaman has basically just soaked right up because, well, again, it's got a princess complex. Although it is loving all the positive attention it's getting right now, so of course it's just being all sweet and nice right now, though clearly throwing a little bit of shade at Ash. However, as the train ride goes along, we see that the train passengers are carrying with them some flowers, and I'm going to pull up my phone on this because I took notes on this one, and I don't remember exactly what they're called, so apologies if this is distracting. But basically, these flowers are called Gracidia flowers, and they actually look a little bit like Shaman. As you see, the thing is, whenever Shaman is in a good mood, so to speak, or comfortable, it begins blooming flowers on its back. And the Gracidia flowers that this woman is carrying look a little bit like Shaman. And as such, they tend to be connected. Well, it turns out they're connected in more ways than one, as once the Gracidia flowers get close to Shaman, its pollen ends up interacting with Shaman, and Shaman changes, starts glowing, has its form shift, until it transforms into basically a flight mode, as it's no longer down to the ground and fluffy, but looks like, I guess, a little dog. It looks like a little dog, with its flowers now looking like a scarf form, and its head now looking like it has a little pair of wings. And immediately Shaman takes to its new form as it begins flying around the train cart. And we see that even Shaman's personality has kind of undergone a shift. Whereas before it was kind of sweet, cuddly, and quiet, and just kind of stepped back. Here it's now a bit more fast, energetic, and just more willing to show off. We even see that Shaman's attitude about things has gone up a notch, as while everyone's traveling, Zero's Magnemite men end up attacking the train, and rather than cowering and hiding behind Ash and Dawn, Shaman actually steps forward and actually starts fighting back against these things alongside Ash and Dawn's Pokémon. So clearly the change has more than just a physical one. Although Shaman's ego is still very much intact, as once they manage to shake off all the Pokemon, Shaman pretty much just steps forward, ends up landing on one of the seats and says, well, it's thank Shaman time! So, yeah, clearly it's still got a bit of an ego. It's just that it's gone from, I'm so cute and cuddly, give me whatever I want, and has now gone from, I'm so awesome and badass, keep laying the praise on, so what can you do? But either way, one of the passengers does let Ash and Co. know where the garden is, and basically says that if they get off at the next train stop, they can take a boat and it can basically take them right to the garden, as it's downstream from the river that they would need to take. As such, Ash and Co. heed this advice, and the next time we see them, they're on that boat as they're waving goodbye to the passengers and on their way. And we see that Shaman is still very much in its flight form as it flies around the river, and has some fun. We see Piplup try to fly with them because Piplup's a penguin Pokemon, but instead falls into the river. Though Shaman does stay close to the water in order to kind of interact with Piplup, and even Ash calls out a Staravia so that Pikachu can ride on its back and fly around with them. Although at one point Shaman tries getting Ash to join in on them, but the thing is, Shaman's this big, and Ash is almost close to my height, and the result is that Shaman nearly pulls Ash's ear off trying to get him to fly with them. So, hey, at the very least, it's like I guess Shaman kind of likes Ash. I don't know. I'll talk more about that when after I'm done with the plot summary. Point is, Shaman. Point is, everybody's having fun. It's all nice, and while there is a reality that the group is gonna have to say goodbye to Shaman, Ash thinks that it might be a bit of a relief, which in turn gets him a nice kick in the legs from Dawn. Ash kind of gets thrown through the crapper in this movie, or at least in the first 2/3. However, the good times come to an end as we see that the sun is starting to slowly go down. But as the group is passing through the river, well, who should show up again but Giratina, as a portal opens up and basically just sucks Ash and Co. straight in with Shaman. As such, the group ends up getting yanked right off the boat and end up right in the reverse world, with Brock coming along for the ride this time. And as such, when Giratina shows himself again, Shaman this time is not cowering in fear, but instead is just like, "Oh, bring it on, Giratina! I'm ready to fight." And so Shaman tries fighting Giratina. But Giratina is a giant legendary Pokemon that rules its own domain, and Shaman is an adorable little dog that can fly and shoot lasers out of its mouth. I mean, it sounds cool on paper, but I don't think that it's comparable to the literal Pokemon devil, so what can you do? Unfortunately, and on top of that, Shaman's power-up doesn't really last, because you see, the thing is, it turns out that Shaman's flight form does come with a few caveats, one of which is it can only use it during the day. As such, as the sun goes down in the real world, its setting is reflected in the reverse world, and thus once night falls, well, Shaman immediately reverts back to its base form, and immediately its stalwart and brave persona is replaced with its cowardly and timid persona, as it is afraid that Giratina is going to eat it, and once more is riding on Ash's hat as the group makes a run for it. With the explanation given for why it's riding on Ash's hat, despite the fact that it kind of complains about it, is that if it gets eaten, Ash will get eaten along with it. So there's just such a dick move, but I kind of like that. In the meantime, Ash and Co. do end up running back into Newton, who in turn is able to give the group cover by leading them into a cave that he's been hiding out at. However, and as such, while Giratina is on the outside, just kind of circling everything, the group at least has some safe grounds for a little bit. But unfortunately, that doesn't really go very far, because guess who should show up? But Zero, who's on board, I failed to mention that one of Zero's companions, so to speak, is basically an e-girl. I'm not even kidding. It's an AI that takes in the form of an anime girl, and she was able to pinpoint where Giratina's next surfacing would be, and thus Zero was able to come in, and thus he flew through the portal to the reverse world, and well, he and his Magnemite immediately go after the group as they take Shaman and basically tie up the group, so to speak, with the Magnemite so they can't interfere. As such, it's here we learn a bit more about Newton, and by extension Zero. As it turns out, they knew each other, and this is not something new that we were just introduced to, because there was a scene earlier in the movie where we saw Zero sitting in his little citadel, and we saw a recording being played of Newton and Zero from years ago, and it turns out that when Newton first entered the reverse world, Zero had gone with them. And, well, I'm just going to spoil this right now because they don't reveal this backstory until after the scene is over. Basically, Newton and Zero were once colleagues. In actuality, Zero was Newton's assistant, and both of them were studying the reverse world. And at one point, they had even managed to find a means of entering the reverse world. We're never told what that means is, but the point is they were able to freely access the reverse world, and they just found it so fascinating. The thing is, though, the only creature in the known universe that seems to be able to freely come and go from the reverse world is Giratina. And the more you say, well, Shaman can exit the reverse world, well, to that I say those are special circumstances, especially since the Shaman can only open a portal between the reverse world and the real world while in the reverse world, and it requires Shaman to absorb a good dose of poisonous gas to do it. So I guess technically that's a power, but again, it's one that only works under special circumstances. Point is, though, Giratina can freely move to and from the reverse world, and so basically Newton and Zero wanted to get that power for themselves, as they felt that, and so what they wanted to do is that they were going to create a machine that was supposed to be able to take Giratina's power and then transfer it to someone else, or most likely into a machine. But the thing is, when Newton began designing the machine, he wound up finding a very, very big flaw with it, as it turned out that if the machine was used to scan Giratina and take its powers, well, it would have an adverse effect on Giratina, destroying it. As such, Newton, when he realized this, decided to completely scrap the project, even deleting all the blueprints. Zero, on the other hand, went absolutely apeshit. Because, you see, the thing is, Zero apparently doesn't like people. He finds the reverse world to just be beautiful, untainted, untarnished. He wants, and he basically thinks of it as his home away from home, a place that he can finally be alone without anyone disturbing him. But, alas, the reverse world is still being tarnished by those disgusting humans, for it gets polluted because of their misdemeanors. So he will want to fix that if he is to call this place home, but he will need the power of Giratina first. So, yeah, his literal villain motivation in this is because he just wants everyone to fuck off and leave him alone. Relatable, but ultimately also insane. We'll get to why later. But either way, the thing is, it turns out that Zero, from memory alone, was able to reconstruct the machine that Newton wanted building. And the thing is, the reason why he's here and followed the group into the reverse world, even though he wants to literally live here, well, he wants Giratina's power. And, the thing is, his fortress, so to speak, is a flying one. And, well, he can't bring the flying fortress right to the reverse world, so what he wants to do is that he wants to lure Giratina to the real world, capture Giratina, and then steal his powers. And, well, since Giratina is currently stuck in the reverse world thanks to whatever Dialga did, well, he kind of basically Zero's plan is what Giratina wanted to do. As Zero has his Magnemite funnel one of the poisonous clouds right to the group, and thus it forces Shaman to absorb the poisonous cloud so that they don't, fucking die. And as such, Shaman absorbs the power and once again ends up unleashing Seed Flare, which in turn opens up a portal. Giratina sees this and, well, since it wants to get out anyway, it goes to the portal, and it turns out that the time lock that Dialga put on it again only worked for portals that Giratina made. As when it passed through the portal that Shaman made, it manages to finally enter the real world, with Ash and Co kind of being pulled along for the ride because, well, it was a powerful portal and began sucking in whatever it could. Save Team Rocket. Yeah, I forgot to mention them. Like I said, they were working for Newton, getting him all his stuff whenever they wanted. But when everything went to hell in the reverse world, I think they almost didn't go with. Almost. In the ending credits, we see they did make it back to the real world. So I'm assuming at some point they do get through. But I don't know if they do that in this initial trip, because when everyone's getting sucked through, they're holding on for dear life. But hey. What do I... No, they don't. They don't go through, because later on we see them again in the reverse world, so I don't know. Anyway, I'm getting off topic, back to the plot summary. Either way, everyone gets sucked back into the real world as Giratina passes through. And we see that whenever Giratina passes from one world to the next, his form changes. As in the reverse world, he's got more like a more serpentine form that only has wings and these claws that are aligned on his back. But when he enters the real world, he instead... The serpentine form changes into a more, I guess, mammalian form as he grows 4 legs and is able to walk around. With Newton basically assuming that the reason why it shifts form is to adjust the different gravities, which makes sense as the reverse world kind of has gravity, whereas the reverse world's gravity is just kind of all over the place, and so it makes sense for Giratina to take a more aerodynamic form for a place where gravity really is a suggestion some of the time. And when it tries to shift into a world where gravity is a much more stable law, of course it would need a form to more appropriately work with that. Unfortunately, though, before Giratina can go off in its search for the 2 legendary Pokemon of time and space, that's when Zero arrives and ends up capturing it. As such, he pulls the thing back to his giant fortress, which comes into view, and the group realizes they need to go after him. Especially when Newton tells everyone what the machine is going to do. Thankfully, they have a ride, because you see, when Zero captured Giratina, he left his own ride behind, as he was flying around a little, I'm going to call it a hover scooter, so to speak, and thus But the thing is, when he went to go see Giratina, he parked the hover scooter, ran over to Giratina, and then jumped on top of the device so that it would pull him back to his ship, leaving the hover scooter completely unattended. And so, as such, since Ash and Co. are good people, they don't want Giratina to die so that its powers can be transferred to Zero. And so Newton ends up hijacking the hover bike, with Ash and Dawn volunteering to come along for the ride. Although while initially Dawn doesn't want Shaman to arrive, as Dawn puts Shaman down by some grass so that she and Ash can join Newton. Well, guess what? It turns out, coincidence of coincidences, the portal that Shaman opened in the reverse world led everybody right to the flower garden that they were trying to get to the whole time. And as such, as the sun comes up, it turns out that this entire area is filled with Gracidea flowers, which is another reason why the Shaman come here. And the Gracidea flowers pollen ends up interacting with Shaman and shifting it back into its flight form. As such, since Shaman is now brave and strong again, it volunteers to help it to come along too, and so everybody flies off to the Zero's flying fortress, leaving Brock behind. It's kind of funny. Regardless, though, everybody basically goes to work trying to rescue Giratina, as it's right there in the middle of the scanner, and it's clear that the more it scans Giratina, the worse the machine is hurting it, as the machine keeps going up and up and up, As such, Ash and Dawn stay on the outside of Zero's ship as they try and use their Pokemon to sabotage the machine however they can, while Newton ends up going into the flying fortress and manages to find the control panel for it. And while Zero initially tries mocking Newton and tells him to just sit back and watch his victory, Newton, well, this is still Newton's machine. He designed it, so he knows its ins and outs, and so he manages to hack into the mainframe, and he manages to shut the thing down just as the scanner for Giratina reaches 99%. As such, the machine finally does get shut down and begins falling apart, with Ash and Dawn happy that everything's working out, only for the fortress's engines to give out. And as Newton meets up with the pair of trainers and Pokemon and their Pokemon, he reveals that in order to shut down the machine, he had to shut down this thing's engines. So it's coming down fast. As such, Ash and Dawn quickly call their Pokemon back as they and Newton get back on the hover bike and basically try getting away as much as they basically try flying away. And in the meantime, while Giratina is no longer trapped in a stasis field where it's being scanned, it's still incredibly weak on the scanning process and does end up falling out of the fortress just as it starts crashing. And as such, Giratina ends up falling into the river below, while the fortress ends up crashing into a nearby mountain and just falls apart. As such, while Giratina isn't dead, it's really not doing well, as it uses what little strength it has left to drag itself out of the water before collapsing on the beach in front of the Gracidea flower garden. As such, Ash and Co. manage to get back onto the ground, and they see Giratina, and at first they think he's dead. Him breathing does alert them that no, he's alive, but not doing so well. As such, Shaman decides that it wants to help the giant monstrosity that tried to kidnap slash intimidate it earlier in the movie, as it flies up to Giratina and begins basically using one of its powers to try and share energy with Giratina. And while it does clearly take a little bit out of Shaman, it does seem to give Giratina his strength back. And so it looks like everything's all fine and dandy. The bad guy's fortress just been taken out. Giratina's A-okay. And even all the Pokemon nearby seem to crowd around Giratina, happy that he's okay. Well, you gotta remember, we still have a bad guy to deal with. Yeah, when Zero's flying fortress came crashing down, Zero himself basically amscrayed. As it turned out, he had a secondary ship and basically that he ejected from the main one. And what I love is that this mini ship actually has a color scheme that looks a lot like Giratina, and there's a reason for it. Because the thing is, while the scan was not 100% completed, 99% is still a good chunk of the way, and so that was enough for Zero to be able to copy Giratina's powers, and so this ship can now do anything that Giratina can do, up to and including opening a portal to the reverse world. As such, Zero immediately arrives in his home away from home, and he decides he wants to get to work ridding this place of the pollution of mankind. As he begins using the weaponry that he has on his ship to begin attacking any parts of this place that are connected to the real world, which in this case include these little ice structures that reflect into the real world, and these various ice pillars that are all around, which which well, when he tears them down, it has a much bigger effect. Because you see, the thing is, at the end of this long river in this large valley that leads to the Giratina Flower Garden, there is a glacier. Now, thousands of years prior, the glacier was what carved the path for this river to form. But now it's now just stuck in place and now doesn't go anywhere. Well, guess what? Well, guess what these pillars in the reverse world are connected to? Yeah, if you guessed the glacier, you're right. And unfortunately, as Zero begins destroying these pillars, it begins having an adverse effect on the glacier, which begins collapsing and actually beginning to move forward into the valley. And while at first everybody thinks that this means that that this thing will come forward and destroy the Giratina Flower Garden, well, Newton reveals that it will actually be a lot worse, as this thing will keep going past that to some nearby villages that are further down. So, yeah, basically Newton's just knucking futs, because it's basically said that he's fully aware that this is what will happen, and he thinks this is the right thing to do. Yes, you're obviously the good guy, you crazy weirdo with the mad look in his eye. I would follow you to the ends of the earth. Either way, the group realizes that Zero needs to be stopped, and as such, Ash ends up riding on Giratina's back as he and Shaman end up flying with Giratina back into the reverse world. And as such, Giratina tries to fight off against Zero in a ship, but well, it turns out that it wasn't really an exaggeration when it was said that this ship can now do everything that Giratina can do, as whatever attacks Giratina throws at it, it's able to send right back and then some. So this thing is kind of an even match for Giratina, and as such, the only plan is that they need to get the big plan is that they need to get Zero out of here. And so while Ash and Shaman do try jumping onto Zero's ship, again, he does his best to try and try and stop them. And in the meantime, Shaman actually does have an idea, because you see, the thing is, even in its flight form, Shaman can still use Flare Seed, and so Shaman believes that if it can absorb one of the toxic clouds again, it can create another explosion, which will once again open a portal, which Ash, Shaman, and Giratina can use to send Zero right back to the real world. However, it's still easier said than done, because Zero is not standing still for shit. Thankfully, the help arrives, because at one point between the battle with Giratina, Zero sent Giratina flying into a rock formation and caused a bit of the rock to fall on it, and so he wanted to get in close to finish Giratina off, but that's when Ash and Shaman arrived, and which distracted Zero, and so as Shaman goes and absorbs the toxins from one of the passing by clouds, and once again Zero tries to attack them. But that's when Giratina decides to be an asshat, as Giratina just grabs onto the ship and just holds it in place as the guy is just trying his best to hold on. But well, the plan seems to go off without a hitch, as Shaman manages to create an explosion, which in turn opens a portal, which begins sucking everything in, which is why I think Team Rocket does manage to escape the reverse world. And to kind of add a bit of a fuck you to everything, not only does Giratina let go of Zero's ship just as the portal begins sucking people in, but it also ends up shooting one last energy beam right at it, so that it can make it go flying and tumbling through. I don't know, I like that. It's nice. It's nice to see the little fuck yous every now and then. Although, while all this was happening in the reverse world, well, back with the glacier, Dawn and Brock were doing whatever they could to try and stop the glacier, alongside all the wild Pokemon who were trying to freeze it in place, and they actually wound up getting some help from another Pokemon, as apparently when the glacier was being destroyed, it wound up opening up the entrance to this what looks like an ancient temple, and inside the ancient temple was apparently another legendary Pokemon, Regigigas, who immediately arrives with a whole herd of other wild Pokemon, whose names escaped me because I do not remember. So if you do know the name of those Pokemon, please let me know in the comments, because I I know it. I just can't recall it right at this moment. And they try, and as such, Regigigas and Co. tried to hold the glacier back, and they succeed. And while they're able to slow it down, they couldn't outright stop it. Thankfully, though, it's at this point when Zero is sent flying back into the real world, and well, once he crashes in front of the glacier, immediately Dawn orders her Pokemon to freeze the thing in place, and so his ship is immediately frozen to the side of the glacier. And unfortunately for Zero, the damage his ship sustained have completely shorted out all of his systems, meaning that not only is he without power, but all of his data on Giratina is now inaccessible. So, in other words, he's lost all of his plans are now ruined. He no longer has access to Giratina's powers, and his ship is now one big icicle. They don't get him out till at the end of the movie, so yeah, I don't know how long he was stuck there. In the meantime, Shaman arrives back in the real world, and upon riding on top of the glacier, it gets so afraid that it reverts back to its base form, though thankfully it lands in the middle of the group, though Ash unfortunately doesn't go with Shaman, though thankfully Ash is not alone, as Ash was able to meet back up with Giratina, and thus Giratina basically works to try and repair the reverse world, as it goes to all the ice pillars that Zero destroyed, and thus using its power, it's able to bring them back, which in turn is able to reestablish the support structures back in the real world, and in turn ends up and finally gets the glacier to basically stop in its tracks. So, yeah, everything's all hunky-dory, and as such, Giratina once more opens a portal as it and Ash come out, and, well, it just lets Ash off. So, yeah, the bad guy is stopped. Giratina is safe. The glacier has been foiled, and Shaman is at the flower garden. I say that's all a big win, right? Well, unfortunately for Giratina, it still has some unfinished business. As while everyone is happy to see it in one place, or to see it okay, Giratina's eyes look to the sky before it immediately takes flight and goes after, with Newton realizing that clearly it must be sensing the presence of Dialga. In the meantime, though, we get back to Shaman as we see the day of the migration finally come, as sure enough, other Shaman do arrive in the Gracidia flower garden, and so the group sees this, and they're thankful to actually be able to see this, which does finally get Ash to admit that he is grateful for going on this adventure, with Shaman finally deciding to show some form of compassion, as it in turn thanks Ash for helping it get this far, and saying that it's grateful itself. Although when it comes time to actually say goodbye, Shaman it gets a little teary-eyed because it doesn't really know how it can express its gratitude for all that Ash and Co have done for it. But, well, it decides that it's going to try and pay that gratitude forward as it runs into the Gracidia flower field alongside the other Shaman, and sure enough, as the day rises, so I'm going to mute this. And so as the sun rises, the Gracidia flowers bloom, and thus their pollen transform all the Shaman into their flight forms, and thus they all fly away for their migration. Everything's all hunky-dory. Ash and Co have a tearful farewell as Shaman says farewell, and thus that's when the film ends. So once again, and of course we get our after-credits stuff. Like I said, we see Zero get pulled out of the ice by Officer Jenny and various police, being led by Newton. We see Team Rocket as they're trying to make their way through the mountains and falling on their asses as a result. And we actually do get into some nice little scenes as we see Ash and Co meeting back up with the people on the train, as we see them dropping off the Gracidia flowers with the grandmother of one of the train's residents, as that's who she was bringing the flowers to. And we then get a splash cut to the families of Ash, Dawn, and Brock, as it turns out that the trio wound up getting bushels of Gracidia flowers and send them to their loved ones, which, that's sweet. I like that. That's nice. So there you go. But yeah, that was Giratina and the Sky Warrior. It's not a bad movie, but I don't think it's a good one either. This is definitely one of those films that I feel is very middle of the road in terms of its quality. There are things about it that I like, but also things about it that I don't. And unfortunately, one of those things is the story. Much like with The Rise of Darkrai, I think this film has a rather cookie-cutter story. While there are occasional twists here and there, like with seeing that Zero survived his Flying Fortress's crash and all that, and seeing that Newton and Zero were once colleagues, which I kind of saw going in a little bit. At the same time, Unfortunately, this film doesn't really have a lot of what made Rise of Darkrai work, in my opinion. The thing is, while Rise of Darkrai also complained had a rather cookie-cutter plot in its execution, what made the Rise of Darkrai work for me was that while things kind of went the way you would expect them to, what really carried the movie forward was that it had characters that actually did feel like full three-dimensional characters, a great atmosphere for the second and third act, which both created a sense of unease and great tension as the clock was ticking down to total destruction. Great visuals, obviously. And the thing is, while I complained that Darkrai may not have had much of a character or arc, at the very least you had a sense that he had a noble soul to him, and thus when you actually saw him doing his best to try and stop Dialga and Palkia from destroying Alamos Town as a consequence of their battle, you really did root for him, which in turn also made his sacrifice in the climax of the film that much stronger and made you that much more happy to see him again at the end of the film when he was restored alongside Alamos Town. The problem for me, however, with Giratina and the Sky Warrior is that the plot is just as cookie cutter as that movie, but it doesn't really have any of the unique aspects of the last movie that made it work. Case in point, let's talk about Shaman. Like I said, Shaman is one of the central characters in the film, and they're kind of annoying. Now, I'm not going to go on record and say that Shaman's like the worst partner character in the movies. There are not. I think there are some characters that might be a little bit more annoying, but ultimately, Shaman was. I don't really know what to say about Shaman. Like I said, Shaman had an ego to them, as they were constantly prissy, arrogant, always wanting attention in the best way possible. We're only nice to people if they basically just cooed and awed over it. And then likewise, when it was in its flight form, while it was a little bit nicer, it was still very much arrogant, it was still very much arrogant, with that arrogance shifting from aren't I cute and adorable to aren't I awesome and badass. And as a result, I didn't really feel that much for Shaman as a side character. Now again, I didn't hate Shaman as a character because, for one thing, they are adorable. Shaman was genuinely looked so freaking cute in this movie that I kind of want to just give him a big hug. And likewise, when Shaman entered its flight form, we did see more layers to its character, as we saw Shaman being more willing to run into danger alongside Ash and Co. when they needed it. And likewise, it was Shaman's idea to send Zero flying back to the real world using another seed flare. So I do like that. So Shaman does pull its weight every now and then, and is clearly clearly does feel like more of an integral character. It's just that as a character, Shaman does not really do it for me. Shaman feels like it's supposed to be a cute comic relief side companion, but it feels very pushy and arrogant and just kind of a dick. Now, I don't hate. Like I said, in some cases that can actually be pretty damn funny. Some of the best parts in the movie are Shaman and Ash's bickering, and that's kind of one of the things I was alluding to during my plot summary. Shaman does not like Ash, but I think it wants Ash to like it. And so there are several points in the movie where, while Shaman will throw shade at Ash and start kind of messing with him and just being a little shit to him because it wants to, at the same time it keeps clinging to Ash like a rug with static cling, as it basically does not leave Ash alone, and I think what Shaman wants is for Ash to pretty much just admit that he thinks it's cute. That's all. And by the end of the movie, I think when Ash finally does say that he is grateful for Shaman for allowing him to be part of this journey, Shaman is at least feels sad, like, yep, that's what I wanted. That's right, bring it in. That's what I wanted, and which I do like. And again, I'm not going to go so far as to say that Shaman's a complete arrogant dickwad, because clearly Shaman did care about Ash and Co. and did try to help them when it could, and did feel sad when it had to part ways with them. But at the same time, it's just that it felt like it didn't really have much of an arc or a fully realized character in that regard. It just kind of felt like it felt like it had a character, but there was really no arc to it. I didn't really see the progression from arrogant little princess complex Pokemon to I'm gonna miss you guys when I go on my migration. I just didn't see the connection from one Shaman to the next. So I do consider that a problem. By that same token, the original characters in this movie unfortunately don't really do it for me. Newton Graceland isn't an awful character, but there isn't really much to him either. He's an eccentric scientist who studies the reverse world. He's got a good heart, and he wants to try and stop Zero from taking over the reverse world and subsequently fucking over the real world. So okay, that's a character. He's a little arrogant about himself, which is only shown in like one friggin' scene, but otherwise, I don't really see much to his character. There's nothing really that complex or interesting about him. He's just there in the movie. I don't hate him, but I can't really say he's that memorable. And the same goes for Zero, unfortunately. Zero feels like a character that I probably could like if we had more time to him, because in the third act, when he just started going batshit insane with destroying the structures that connected the reverse world and the real world, it was actually kind of scary to see him just screaming his head off, going, "Don't you see what I'm doing? I'm trying to protect this world!" Like, god damn, this guy is knucking butts. So yeah, in that regard, I think he could be a fun villain. But what kind of halts any interest for me is that his motivation is really fucking stupid. His motivation is literally just that he just wants his own private home away from home. He thinks the reverse world would be perfect for that, and he basically wants to cut off all connection from the real world because he thinks the real world is polluting his beautiful garden-like paradise or some bullshit like that. And to that I respond with, if you really do want to be alone by yourself, get an estate in the mountains or something. I don't really know. Because clearly he has some money to burn, considering that he had a flying fucking fortress with his own AI assistant. Clearly he must be making some cash from something, so why doesn't he just get his own little home away from home? Or does he think that humans will ruin that too? I'm just gonna say this right now, dude. There is nowhere you can go that you can get away from these people. And even when everyone tries telling him, if you destroy these connections to the real world, you're gonna be hurting a lot of people, he's just like, I don't fucking care. That's exactly what I want. He's just a dick. He's just a dick, and there's really nothing that complex about him. Well, the most we get of his character before he and Newton had their falling out was in that video recording I mentioned earlier when he and Newton managed to make it into the reverse world the first time. As at one point they both saw Giratina, which in turn caused Newton to lose his footing, and for Zero to run and go check on him to make sure he was okay. That's it. There is really no other layers to his character. We don't really understand why he wants to be away from the real world. Why he's so determined to see the real world as nothing more than just full of evil and bile that are infecting the sanctity that is the reverse world. So it feels, honest to God, stupid seeing all that to see him basically losing his shit about it, because ultimately his solution is basically just fucking overkill. His means of trying to stop the reverse world from the real world from interacting is by almost killing a bunch of people in the real world and not batting an eye. So, like, dude, you kind of need some, dude. I think he might need some help. Maybe the reason he wants to be alone is because his mom made him Zero and he got made fun of for it, so now he hates everybody else as a result. I don't fucking know. My point is, it just doesn't make sense for me for why Zero wants to do the things he does. His motivations are simple and stupid, and as a villain, he doesn't really do it for me. He has his crazy moments that make me go, "Geez Louise, this guy is knucking futs." But at the same time, I don't really feel that much of an attachment to him as a villain. He's not really. There's nothing really fun or memorable about him. Honest to God, until I sat down to watch this movie again for this vlog, I forgot he existed. And it wasn't until I was actually watching the movie that I saw him and I thought, oh yeah, this film has a villain. That was my reaction. That was my genuine reaction. I forgot he existed. So, yeah, let that speak volumes to how much of an impact he must have left then. So, yeah, I find that to be a problem. Unfortunately, that's all. And unfortunately, another problem I do have with the film is, once again, the pacing. Much like with the last Pokemon movie, I mean, all the characters we're introduced to don't really have arcs. And I did which I brought up when I talked about Shaman's character. But the thing is, that's more prevalent here than before. As while in The Rise of Darkrai, I was more willing to look past that flaw because the characters we were given were, like I said, more three-dimensional and rounded and actually felt like real, genuine characters. These characters don't really have much to them. They feel like they're there for exposition, and that's it. They have certain personality traits, but then those never come up at any point in the movie. Well, okay, actually, scratch that. I'll give some kudos to Newton. His ego does come into play at least a couple more times in the movie, but nothing really plot relevant. It's mostly just comic relief at Team Rocket's expense. But otherwise, it doesn't really otherwise, it's not really a big major factor. So yes, that's kind of another problem. But the thing is, the lack of arcs keep me from being invested in these characters, and in some regards, because the arcs that were shown aren't really set out in full, it leads to moments that don't really make a lot of sense. Case in point, Giratina being captured by Zero. Now, on the one hand, I do understand why Ash and co. would want to save Giratina from being killed by Zero, because, well, they're good people, and regardless of whatever Giratina did, they believe he doesn't deserve to have his powers just stripped away and have him and be reduced to nothing more than a lifeless husk just because this nutball wants to live in the reverse world. So in that regard, I do understand that. But then, why would the characters suddenly want to befriend Giratina? Like when Giratina is saved and Shaman restores it to life, suddenly they're all just buddy with Giratina. I feel like that their quote unquote friendship would be more of an uneasy alliance, because in their cases, they both have a common foe. After all, if Zero goes into the reverse world and screws with everything, he would want to destroy. It will hurt people in the real world, which our heroes can't let happen. And likewise, Giratina would probably want some payback on this guy for nearly killing it because he wanted its powers. So I could understand why Giratina would want to go after it. But by that same token, them suddenly being all buddy and being like, "Oh, we want to work with you now. We can do this, Giratina. I want to help you. I'm glad to see you're all right, despite the fact that you've tried to fucking kidnap me and make me use this very powerful attack just so you can get into the real world again." But I don't really see the connection again. Why are they suddenly friends with the literal Pokemon devil, even though this thing has spent the majority of the time they interacted with it being antagonistic and mean? It doesn't make sense in my mind, and it happens throughout the movie, it's a lack of connection. It's a thing that holds the film back in my eyes. These are things that keep me from being fully invested in what I'm seeing on the screen. And as a result, I don't really give a damn that much about what's going on in the film because the film isn't really doing a lot to keep me invested in what I'm seeing. With that said, while these aspects hold the film back, I will still say that I do think there are some moments that I do think work. Like I said, there is some genuinely nice humor and fun with seeing Ash and Shaman bicker. It's honestly some of the best parts of the movie, in my opinion. Seeing them just get on each other's case, Shaman basically trying to force Ash to like it by trying to either be buddy or just riding on top of him when it's in its docile form. Docile form, with one of my favorite lines again being Shaman admitting that they were riding on Ash because if they got eaten, Ash would get eaten too. So I don't know. I just love that line. It's just a nice bit of dickery that I just kind of can't help but love. I love the design for the reverse world. God damn, I think the reverse world looks really damn cool, and I do like seeing it whenever the group visits there. So I think that's pretty damn impressive. And if part of the plot had been being stuck there, I'd probably be a little more forgiving of this film. Likewise, the action is still really damn fun. Everything looks fantastic, and the climax does carry some tension to it when we see Zero going off the rails and basically destroying the support beams for the glacier in the reverse world. So that the real thing will end up flying forward and end up killing a bunch of people in a nearby town. Again, for me, there are things about the film that I think do work. It's just that, for me, what holds the film back is just the lack of creative characters, the lack of flow for their arcs, very forgettable characters in some regards. In the case of its villain and the new character they introduced. And while there are aspects that I do think work, as I do think the writing at some points is fun, the film of course does look fucking beautiful. I think the action looks really damn cool, and I think Giratina can be pretty damn awesome. Unfortunately, these aspects aren't enough to save the movie in my eyes. This doesn't push the film far enough that I dislike it, but I can't bring myself to like it either. It's somewhere kind of in the middle. It's a film that I can just kind of go, to. And that's really what it is. It's not a film I despise, it's not a film that I hate, but it's not a film that I can consciously bring myself to like either. It's just somewhere in the middle, somewhere where I basically just somewhere where I'm just kind of in this strange amorphous place where I'm just kind of like, I didn't dislike watching this film, but I don't think I'd watch it again either. So that's pretty much all I can say about it. That's pretty much all I can say about it. Didn't hate it, didn't like it either, so I don't really know what else I can do. So, but yeah, that's pretty much all I can really say about the film. I'm sorry I'm not really getting into it and getting into in depth with my critiques or compliments as I would like to, but that's really all I can boil it down to. It's just a film that happened. It has some memorable aspects here and there, but otherwise, it just happened. So there you go. But there you go. But with that said, like I said last week, this film is this film is the second part of a 3-part story arc, and there are still some loose threads left hanging. After all, while we have now learned why Dialga and Palkia were fighting in the last film, we don't really know what brought this fighting on. Why did both of them think their territory was being intruded on? And likewise, Giratina is still seeking the pair out. So what will he do when he finds them? But, well, we will get the answers to both of these questions as we see this storyline wrapped up in the next film in the lineup. And, well, since Ash and Co. had spent this film meeting the Pokemon Devil, well, I think it's time they met the Pokemon equivalent of God, as next week we'll be taking a look at Arceus and the Jewel of Life.